Hey everyone, thanks for tuning back in and welcome back to another video. Today is a slightly different one. I'm not necessarily on the links playing, but rather I had an interesting question posed to me in our golf group. So JP, if you're listening, thanks. He asked our group, who's planning a big golf trip in about 6 weeks, what golf ball does everyone play? I've always been bouncing back and forth between the Chromesoft and the TP5s. And one thing I've always just wondered myself is the main difference between the TP5X and the Chromesoft X. Yes, you can Google it and read what the actual differences are, but let's be realistic. That probably applies to scratch or even pro players who can actually tell the difference. So the point of this video is to test out how golf balls impact mid to high handicappers. I consider myself still a high handicapper in terms of ball striking and swing speed, so I think this would be a good test for the quote-unquote average golfer out there. So I decided to grab some of the top balls. Luckily, I had most of them in my bag, aka I only used what I had in my bag. I didn't actually go and buy some, but I had a Pro V1 and Pro V1X, a TP5 and TP5X, the Chromesoft and Chromesoft X, and then the Bridgestone Tour B RXS. And then when I was going through my bag, I found a few other random ones, and I was really curious to see how these quote-unquote lesser balls or non-premium balls actually perform based on the TrackMan stats. So I also have a Pinnacle I'll be testing out, a Top Flite, a Vice, and I think there's one more I can't remember, but it'll be a combination of those. So really fun test just to see how these premium top-of-the-line $50 a dozen ball compares to some of these less expensive, cheaper balls, but I will be using two main clubs to test. I will use my 56 degree or my sand wedge, and I'm playing the Callaway MD5, the Jaws, and I will be using a 7-iron. Decided to pick a mid-iron. I'm using the Taylormade Sim Max. I know that one of the bigger things that a lot of these balls will probably show their difference in will be distance with the driver. Decided not to use driver today. I actually couldn't even finish the 7-iron section, but let's go ahead and jump into the stats and show you what I found. So for the first test, I decided to compare the top four balls, and in my opinion, there's kind of a three-legged race between the Pro V1, TP5, and Chromesoft. When I looked online, I believe the PGA Tour, I think 70 or 75% of them use the Pro V or the Pro V1X. That includes JT, Patrick Cantlay, and some of the big time guys. But what was really interesting to me is that it actually was the worst ball for me out of all of them. I think over the years, I've always played a softer ball, so the Chromesoft in particular is something I just feel super comfortable with. And I don't know how much of a mental, kind of thing comes into play with these, where I just know I like the Chromesoft and TP5s better, so they did perform fairly well. However, the Bridgestone actually came in with pretty good numbers. Now, I do the same test with the 7-iron, and you can see here, in my 7-iron, it usually goes about anywhere from 165 to 175 total, and the carry is around 160, 165. So they're all pretty accurate in terms of where I think they should be. But I think for longer irons and to compress them better, I think you can see that I perform better, I think, with the softer ones. And I don't think that's a surprise because I do have a slower swing speed. So I could see where maybe for folks who have really, really high swing speeds, you might not want the softer ball and you might want something that flies a little better. But it was just an interesting test to see. And keep in mind that I also tracked a bunch of other stats. I'll be transparent, I had no clue how to add them all into one graph without making it look terrible. But this was the last stat that I wanted to show in regard to spin rate. Now the spin rates you see here, especially for the 56 degree wedge, I think when I was looking online, tour players are like 11,000. I'm only floating around 7 to 8, so it's not great, but I think that's the biggest difference, where for pros and for those that have much more control and faster swing speed, you'll notice that you can have better spin and control of the ball. Someone like myself who doesn't strike it perfectly will probably get exposed, but at the end of the day, probably doesn't matter, to be honest. Now the next slide you're going to see, and this is actually something I've been meaning to do for forever. I don't know if it's just a scam and it's a way for these manufacturers to make more money, but I've always wondered how the quote-unquote X version or the counterparts of the regular ball performs. And so you can see here that I decided to test the top 3 with their counterpart. And I was really shocked to see that I actually performed a lot better all the way across the board with the X version. So I guess the whole mindset of me wanting and needing a softer feel to help compress the ball with a slower speed maybe isn't true, or at least that's what I want to think, because as we get to this next slide, it's actually really interesting to see how when we get to the longer irons and the 7-iron in particular, you'll actually see that the softer feel does help. I believe as a slower swing speed, that's where the compression can really kick in. And if you're not swinging past a certain point in terms of club speed, then you should probably stay away from the X. So long story short, I think my kind of summary is if you have a slower swing speed like me, you'll benefit from it on the longer and maybe even the driver, but you'll lose some feel around the greens with wedges. And then the last slide, this is probably my favorite of them all because I decided to just throw all of them out there and put them to the test. So you'll notice here that I throw in the Vice, the Pinnacle, and I believe the Top Flite are the last 3. And I was so shocked just to see that, yes, some of them don't perform as good like the Top Flite, but the Vice, numbers were through the roof. But the Top Flite and Pinnacle's performance, while it's not great in comparison, it's not as bad as I thought it'd be. So it's almost the concept of, do you want to be paying 2-3x the cost for a ball that's only performing slightly better? And I really wish I had a couple more balls to test. The Kirkland was definitely on my list. I think I like those a lot. And I did have a Snell in my bag, but it had a crack in it, so I didn't want to test it with that, but that's also another good ball. So in summary, I think it's safe to say that for people like me, a mid to high handicapper, if you're not hitting the ball at a certain ball speed, if you're not at a certain smash factor, keep in mind I actually kept track of both of those stats and actually a lot of others, but just didn't post them. It was kind of overwhelming when you look at all the data. But if you're not at a certain threshold in striking the ball well, you'll get away with any ball just fine. If you start getting to a level where ball striking is elite and you swing really fast, that's where you'll notice some of the premium balls. So hopefully this video can save you a few bucks. I think there are some really good ones out there. The Snells are something that I really wish I could have tested. It's half the cost, but apparently plays like a Pro V1. And this is not an endorsement for Snell, unless Snell, if you're listening, send me some balls, that'd be great. And then the Kirklands, again, really mad I couldn't play the Kirklands, but maybe I'll do another video with those included. But thanks for tuning in. Let me know what you think, and until next time.